Alright guys, welcome to the video for Standard 12. Remember that Standard 12 is Martin, Georgia, and so this is the second part of the notes that are on the test for tomorrow, so just make sure you know that the civil rights stuff is also on there, okay? So here we go. First thing we have to talk about is the Cold War. Now remember that the Cold War is a competition between the US and the Soviet Union after World War II. So the sort of root of the Cold War is the fact that after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union are the two superpowers left in the world. Both of us have nuclear weapons, and we both have very different ideas on the way government and economics should work. So remember that the US is a democracy, and the US believes in capitalism. Now remember that capitalism is a market economy. That is where basically your economy is based on what you can sell and what people want to buy. So the government's not telling you what to do. If you want to become a doctor, you can go and become a doctor as long as you can, go to school. If you want to start a business, you can do that. Communism is a little bit different. So the Soviets are, they believe in communism and dictatorship. So communism is where the government is basically going to tell you what kind of career you're going to have or what you are going to produce. It's not based on what people will buy and sell and how you can make money. It's based on what does the government think is the best way to use their resources. We also call that a command economy, so make sure you know that, okay? We also talked about how the United States is a democracy, which means that people get to vote, and the Soviet Union is a dictatorship where their leaders are appointed, okay? That is sort of the main difference between these two superpowers. And the United States and the Soviet Union both want to spread their ideas to other parts of the world. They want to sort of increase their influence in other parts of the world. And they never actually fought side by side. Instead, they fought what were called proxy wars. And what that means is that, the United States never directly bombed the Soviet Union, and they never directly bombed us. But instead, when we were, getting involved in other countries, we would fight in those countries sort of through those people. The two examples of this would be Korea and Vietnam. Now, remember that Korea was sort of a success for the United States. We were able to keep North Korea from invading South Korea, and still to this day, Korea is a democracy. Vietnam was not the case. We tried to stop North Vietnam from not from attacking them, but from taking over South Vietnam, and the war lasted for a really long time throughout the late 60s and early 70s, and the United States pulled out, and South Vietnam became a communist country. So Korea, a success, South Vietnam, not a success, right? And the Cold War lasts from 1947 to 1991. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses because of money. That is the reason why they collapsed. They ran out of cash, and there was a lot of reasons for that. They were trying to keep up with the United States in the space race and in building up their military, but a lot of it comes from the sort of problems with communism, where the United States could try to build our economy through doing things that would make us a lot of money. This communist system really kind of tied down what sort of, how the Soviets could spend their resources. They weren't doing what was best for their economy. They were doing just what the government thought was best. And that was a big difference between the two, okay? Then we sort of reviewed through Maynard Jackson and Andrew Young a little bit. Remember that Maynard Jackson is the first black mayor of Atlanta. That's going to be big. He really pushed to get more minorities into the police force. And he also really pushed to make Atlanta the sort of hub of the South. And when I say the hub of the South, I'm talking about sort of expanding the airport, which is why the airport was named after him. He helped add the international terminal to the airport, and he had a whole bunch of convention centers built around the airport and around Atlanta, so that when people were flying into Atlanta, they would stay there, have their meetings for their big corporations. They would stay in hotels, eat at the restaurants, and bring a lot of money and business into Georgia. So when I say it's a hub of the hub of the South, I mean that it's a place that people go to Atlanta specifically to conduct business and things like that. We also talked about this idea called affirmative action with Maynard Jackson. Remember that affirmative action is this belief that throughout history there have been certain groups of people in the United States, women, minorities, that have not been treated, fairly, things like slavery and Jim Crow and stuff like that, and then just women not being able to vote and get the same the same treatment as men. So all of these things added up to these populations not having the same opportunities as, basically white men. And so with affirmative action, it was this belief that when it came to like colleges and universities or in the workforce, in order to get a more diverse workforce, to get more Black people, Hispanic people, women, Asian people working in certain careers and in certain universities, the universities and the jobs were going to actually take race into consideration when they were hiring people or admitting people into universities. Now, this doesn't mean that the people that they were admitting was only being admitted because of their race. Instead, the way this sort of worked out was if a university was 80% white and before, then when they were doing admissions, they would say, okay, which people met these requirements to enter into the college, and if there was a woman or a minority who met those requirements, they would kind of go to the front of the list to be admitted, so that you would have a more diverse population on your campus or on your workforce. And that then, in turn, those sort of populations would go back to, the people that, their families and their communities, and then they would have better jobs and better educations, and then that would start to grow those communities. Remember that they did name the airport after him. I did mention that. Andrew Young, member of the SCLC, you do need to know that. That's the group, that's Martin Luther King's group. Remember that those were older people that went to his church who were members. They would go to the bus boycotts and the marches and things like that. So Andrew Young was a civil rights leader. He was the first Black member of Congress after Reconstruction who was able to actually serve out his term from Georgia. Remember, because right after Reconstruction, Georgia had an election, and a lot of Black legislators were elected, but then they got kicked out. They said that they couldn't read, which was, sort of a product of slavery, or they were falsely accused of crimes. And so Andrew Young is going to be one of the first to get elected and actually serve out his term after Reconstruction. It says right here that he serves as an ambassador to the United Nations. Now, remember that the UN is the organization that was set up after World War II as a peacekeeping operation. So make sure you know that the UN was set up after World War II. And you want to know that basically the way this works is all of the major countries in the world that will agree to work together will join the UN. They have representatives that go there, and let's say the United States is angry at a country. Well, then rather than just bombing them, what we do is we have the UN sort of try to work out an agreement between us and whatever country we're angry at, and they can be mad at us and work out an agreement with us as well. If you look right here, he later serves as a member of, as the mayor of Atlanta, and you do want to know that while he was there, he brought in new jobs to the city, pushed for companies to be owned by women and minorities. That's going to be a big thing. He tried to get scholarships for students in Atlanta, and also he's going to sort of try to help bring the Olympics to Georgia. Remember that the Olympics were brought here in 1996. That's going to be important for us later, okay? All right. Next thing we got is President Jimmy Carter. This is important, the only president from Georgia. Now, remember what we talked about with Jimmy Carter. We said that Jimmy Carter was sort of seen as a good candidate, a good person, but he had a lot of problems while he was in office. And remember that he was really elected because the president before him was Gerald Ford, who was sort of taken up with the scandal, the Watergate scandal. Remember that Gerald Ford was the vice president for Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had to step down because he was accused, and he did it, was accused of spying on the Democrats during the 1960s, I guess it would have been the 1966 presidential election. And basically he was, had to step down. He's going to be impeached. And Ford pardoned Nixon, and that really sort of sealed the deal for Ford. He did that because he didn't want Nixon to go to prison and to put the country through a trial. But after that, the American people didn't really trust Gerald Ford. And so they wanted somebody they could trust. And Jimmy Carter was seen as a nice guy from the South. He was seen as sort of a civil rights leader. He did a lot of good things while he was the governor of Georgia. If you look right here, he tried to improve education. He tried to get justice for like minority groups and better treatment. He said that they said that he tried to sort of get better mental health systems in Georgia. He hired more women and minorities into his government than anybody previous before him. So very, very important sort of guy at a Georgia level. But when he became president, he faced a lot of problems. The first problem that Jimmy Carter faced while he was in office was this issue of stagflation. Now remember that this is sort of two words put together: stagnant and inflation. And you guys know what the word stagnant means. It means it's not moving, okay? And if your economy is not moving, that is a very bad thing, because that means that, yes, people are going to have jobs, but they're not going to be getting better jobs. They're not going to be getting raises, and the economy is not going to be growing new jobs. So when people are getting older and they go out to look for jobs, they're not going to find them, okay? So having a stagnant economy is very bad. You want your economy to be constantly growing, and you know, that's a big deal. The other word in here is inflation. Now, remember that inflation basically just means that the value of your money is going down, okay? I can't spell today. Sorry about that. It means that the value of your money is going down. So, yes, your economy is not necessarily crashing, it's stagnant, but then the value of your money is going down, which means that people are going to feel like they're doing the same amount of work or even more work, but getting paid less for it, okay? And one of the sort of easiest ways to get the American people not to like you very much while you're in office as the president is to have a bad economy. And Jimmy Carter worked hard to try to fix this, but he wasn't really able to combat the stagflation that he was facing. He did have some successes while he was in office. We talked about the Camp David Accords. Remember that this is going to be a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. You need to remember that Israel was helped sort of created by the United States and the other sort of allies after World War II in 1948 because we wanted to create a Jewish state. Sort of as a, you know, kind of a apology for not stepping in to stop the Holocaust sooner. And right after the United States gets involved and creates Israel, remember Israel is the whole, you know, they picked that site because that's the holy city of Jerusalem, and that used to be a place called Palestine. And after the United States stepped in and took that land away from the Palestinians and helped create Israel, then, you know, basically the Middle East turns against the United States. And we tried really hard to sort of support the country of Israel and avoid wars with these other Muslim countries that surround Israel, and we weren't successful with that, and we're still not really successful with that today in a lot of ways. But Jimmy Carter was actually able to get Egypt and Israel to sit down at Camp David, which is like the president's sort of home away from the White House, and come to a peace agreement to stop the fighting between Egypt and Israel. And I think Jimmy Carter was hoping that if Egypt and Israel could work something out, then maybe Israel and other sort of Muslim countries in the Middle East would be able to work something out as well. That hasn't really panned out. We know that, you know, the Palestinians are still mad at Israel today, and they're still constantly fighting. If we look right here, he also gets credit for something called the SALT II Treaty, or the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. Remember that Jimmy Carter, while he's in office, the Soviet Union is still a country, and we're in the middle of the Cold War. There's this arms race. You know, both sides are building lots and lots of nuclear weapons. And Jimmy Carter is able to get the Soviets to sit down and create a treaty where the United States and the Soviets would agree to not only build less nuclear bombs, but also to take apart some of the ones that they had to sort of help avoid the fear of sort of nuclear destruction. But Jimmy Carter did have a lot of failures. The first failure they had was dealing with the 1980s Olympics. Basically, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and the United States tried to, you know, show that we were angry at the Soviets. We were not going to, you know, get involved with the Olympics. The United States actually gave weapons to the people in Afghanistan to try to fight against the Soviets, which is another example of kind of like a proxy war. We didn't send in troops necessarily, but we sent in weapons to kind of support the Afghanis against the Soviets. The other big thing, and probably the thing that cost Jimmy Carter re-election, would have been the Iran hostage crisis. So remember that Iran, it's a Muslim country, they were angry about Israel, and also Iran kind of went through a revolution, a cultural revolution around this time, where they went from being almost Western like us, sort of more progressive, women could work outside the home and drive cars and things like that, to they went to be very sort of religiously based. They sort of went to this thing called Sharia law, where they were following the Muslim Quran sort of to a T, and that's where you started to see the stories of women not being able to drive cars, or wearing the burqas that covered their whole bodies, or sort of being more strict. And they decided that they did not like the Western influences of the United States, and the Ayatollah, who was the sort of the religious leader of Iran, ordered the attack on the U.S. embassy in Iran, and basically they held the people in that embassy hostage for 444 days. And this was a big deal because the people in the United States didn't understand why Jimmy Carter wasn't able to get those people out. To be held hostage for over a year is a really long time. And it wasn't from lack of trying. The U.S. did lead a couple of operations that, tried to get those people out. They failed. There was things like helicopters crashing and stuff like that it just didn't work out. And this ultimately resolves itself once Jimmy Carter has lost the election. The next president's going to be Ronald Reagan, and at the same time that Ronald Reagan's putting his hand on the Bible, taking the oath of office to be the president, the Iranians put those hostages back on a plane to send them back home, and that's going to really sort of tarnish the image of Jimmy Carter. He was kind of seen as weak when it came to foreign relations and not being able to bring these people home. But Jimmy Carter worked really hard. The story goes that on the day he was about to be taken out of office, that they were up all night trying to call the Iranians and work out a deal to bring those men home. So, it made him look bad, but, he worked really hard to bring those people home. Okay. And then stagflation, we already kind of talked about that. Next thing we've got is sort of Jimmy Carter post-presidency. If you look right here, it says he won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his work in trying to secure world peace and in international conflicts, things like the Camp David Accords. And he was even kind of a diplomat for other presidents. They would send him over as a representative to kind of talk with other countries to, work out deals in the Middle East. If you look right here, he founded the Carter Center, which is like his charity. They send, money, and they send, drugs and stuff to poorer countries so that they can help cure diseases and help people live. It says he's also a supporter of Habitat for Humanity. If you don't remember what that is, that's where they build like homes for homeless people. They get like old properties and rundown properties, or sometimes they build new houses, but they fix them up and they give them to people so that they have a place to live. This is going to be very big for us. So the 1996 Olympics is crucial for the city of Atlanta because Atlanta was a big city in 1996, but we were not seen as sort of an international city like New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. And this event puts Atlanta sort of on the map to the rest of the world. They might not have known where Atlanta was or anything about it, but once Atlanta hosts the Olympics and the rest of the world is staring at us on the news for weeks at a time while the Olympic Games are going on, people are going to know about the city of Atlanta, and they're going to want to come here and spend money here. And that was what the 1996 Olympics did for us. It was like advertising the city and showing that Atlanta is a good place to live. It's a good place to do business. And so if you look right here, when we found out that Atlanta was going to host the Olympics, they basically cleaned up, entire parts of the city. They would build sidewalks. They would tear down old apartment buildings or clean up apartment buildings. They built new restaurants and hotels and new convention centers. They built Turner Field. Oh, this is Turner Field where the Braves used to play. They built all of this stuff sort of to get ready for the Olympics. And every city that hosts an Olympics has to do this. They have to build a new stadium. They have to sort of revitalize where the athletes are going to be staying and where the people who are coming in to visit the city go. And so Atlanta was no different, and this really sort of increased the sort of foot traffic in the city and brought a lot of money and jobs to the city, and that's going to be very, very important. If you look right here, I've got two sort of sides here. I've got the short-term benefits of the Olympics and the long-term benefits of the Olympics. There's a question on the test about this. You need to know what the short-term versus long-term effects of the Olympics were. So short-term, we sort of improved the city. Now, this was 20 years ago at this point. So are there going to be places that they revitalized during the Olympics that are not, not great now? Yes, which is why this is considered a short-term improvement. But Atlanta is a city sort of on the mend. We are definitely revitalizing Atlanta. There are lots of, very wealthy people moving into the city. Younger people are wanting to move into the city for the sort of excitement of living in the city. So this was definitely one of the short-term benefits. You want to know that. Brought money and jobs to the city. That is true. You do want to know that. Improved the city's reputation and brought a lot of tourism. The zoo was already here before the Olympics, but the Atlanta Aquarium and the World of Coke have been built since the Olympics, and they basically bring in tourists. People fly into Atlanta, might have a couple hours to kill, and they'll go here and they'll eat at restaurants and visit the sites to see. And so these things, bring attention to the city. The other things that bring attention to Georgia, Six Flags, Whitewater. They can go up to the Blue Ridge Mountains and things like that. Go to Savannah, But this is definitely important for improving Georgia's reputation as a tourist destination. Long-term recognition. People know about us. Name recognition. Showed that we could host major events. This was shown again. We just hosted the Super Bowl. City is a hub for conventions and sporting events. Yes, college football teams love to go to Georgia, sort of as neutral ground during like college games and stuff. And if you look right here, many professionals are moving to the city, because for a while, Atlanta was not the place where if you had money, you wouldn't really want to live in Atlanta. You would want to go there and work and make money, but you didn't want to live there. And that's starting to change. There are parts of Atlanta that are very, very nice. Georgia's economy. You want to know that tourism is huge in Georgia. If you look right here, it brings in about $59 billion. People can go all over the state. We've got Atlanta, lots of things to do there. The next sort of biggest destination is Savannah. But then there's also things like the Blue Ridge Mountains. You can go hunting in the coastal plains and in the Piedmont regions. There's tons of stuff to do here. So we got about 100 million people that travel to Atlanta every year. Some of them here are just for business, just for the airport, but then they get out of the airport and, spend money in local businesses. The next thing I have up here is the Savannah Harbor expansion. Make sure you know that they really, really added on to the port in Savannah, and they made it deeper, they made it wider, so that we could get more big container ships in and out. Because when Georgia is used as a trading port, we get a cut of everything that's coming into that port. We make money off of it. And so if you look right here, it brings in about $67 billion a year, and there's 350,000 jobs that are affected by the Savannah port. Of course, this is the people that work at the port, that maintain it, that drive the cranes to unload the ships, all that stuff. But the big one here is also going to be like truck drivers, are going to be important. So that, employs a lot of them because they come here, get the goods, drive them all over the country. They might just drive them to the airport in Atlanta so they can be flown somewhere else. But jobs are huge here. Now, both tourism and the Savannah port are huge employers in Georgia, but do not ever forget that the number one employer is always agriculture in Georgia. Okay, that is our number one industry. It brings in more money than anything else. Okay. Oh, I just had a brain fart and couldn't remember how to spell agriculture, but we're going to move on. All right. Now, next thing, the film industry. This is a relatively new thing, so we talked about this a lot. Remember that the film industry is in Georgia for a couple of different reasons. Number one is the weather. We have pretty mild weather. Okay, it gets cold here, it gets hot here, but it doesn't freeze here. And it's so, you can pretty much do business all of the time in Georgia. They can film year round. Number two, taxes. Georgia offers huge tax cuts to movie studios, and they do that so that it's cheaper to make your movie here than it is in, say, California or Texas or New York or Chicago or wherever else they're going to film. We want to keep our taxes in Georgia low and offer these movie studios tax cuts so that they will film here in Georgia. Because if they film here in Georgia, they will pay taxes into the Georgia economy, but then they will also support things like the airport. They'll support things like the restaurants and the hotels and all of the businesses, people who, maybe do makeup on the sets, or they, make clothes for the movies, or, design the sets, whatever it is. You're going to create lots of jobs by having these movies filmed here, right? And then number 3 is sort of just goes by with like location. We have lots of space here. They can, expand Pinewood Studios right here in Atlanta. They can build out. They've got plenty of room around it to keep expanding. And so that's also sort of a benefit of filming in Georgia.